A 25-year-old Democrat, Gen Z by the way, which is very important, has now declared that she will be running for an Arizona congressional seat against MAGA. Before I play you her announcement video, subscribe if you want daily, independent, and progressive content. We're going to be covering stories like these that the mainstream media doesn't cover as much, if at all. It's free to subscribe, but most importantly, you can always change your mind. With that said, I'll play you the video.
We launched this campaign 24 hours ago, and 500,000 of you have seen yourself in our story, standing up to say that we deserve more. Let me do that one more time.
I'm a young woman and you're a middle-aged man. I'm wondering why it's your right to take away my right to choose Planned Parenthood.
Political influencer and reproductive rights activist Deja Fox speaking during night one of the Democratic National Convention.
Seats like this only come up every 20 years. There hasn't been a congressional election in this district in some of our lifetimes. There are people who have told me to wait my turn. Young people like me don't have the time to sit this out. Our party needs to stand up and stop picking predictability over possibility. It's hard to be a first-time candidate, to be young and working class and in this race, and that's by design. Things feel really scary right now because they are. I see a lot of politicians putting their head down, a lot of Democrats. That is the difference between them and me. We know that there is leadership in our generation. They are just failing to see it. There's so many people that are excited about this, our race, our candidacy. It shouldn't be about money deciding elections. It shouldn't be about other elected officials deciding elections. Like, it should be about you deciding elections. But I think we are better off when we give people someone to get excited about.
It's great because we need more young people in office. Seems like such an obvious statement, but for many in politics, they don't want young people in office. That's why you see apathy among some young people, while other youth, like me, are trying to encourage more people to be more civically engaged and active. Of the people that I talk to, Republicans and Democrats, they both seem to be sick of the current status quo of politicians who were born a century ago that are going to die in the seats that they think that they're entitled to once they're elected to that seat. And they've been in those seats, honestly, for decades, right? And they've typically been in these seats longer than we have been alive for. So meet Deja Fox. She's running for Congress in Arizona to fight for young people and reshape the Democratic Party, as this Teen Vogue article discusses. Now, Deja Fox, this is Deja Fox. I keep saying every single time, by the way, that whichever party starts passing down the torch to the next generation will win that next generation, right? You give that next generation room to grow, they will like you and support you. That's my view. It's always been my view. And this, keep in mind, is against a backdrop and context of a Republican Party that has now elected the oldest president ever. So with that said, let's get into this article though. So it starts with saying, Deja Fox doesn't call herself optimistic, although the 25-year-old activist began telling the world as a teenager that she intended to become president of the United States. The 2024 election was a punch in the gut. I was at Howard University on election night during that concession speech, and it was difficult, but not surprising, she told Teen Vogue. And this is, for extra context, Kamala Harris was going to deliver a victory speech at Howard University had she won the presidency. So that's what she means by her being at Howard University the night when she instead had to hear a concession speech. And so it states here, Fox found that she no longer had faith in many older elected officials she'd spent her career uplifting, lobbying, or critiquing on behalf of Gen Z. Now Fox is running for Congress in her home state of Arizona, seeking to replace the late Representative Raul Grijalva, I think I pronounced that right, hopefully, who held that office for almost Fox's entire life until he passed away in March. And keep in mind, of the last 8 congressional representatives that passed away in Congress, in office, 8 of them, those 8 people have all been Democrats. So continuing, it states, Fox has mere months to win a competitive primary in a special election to replace Grijalva and set the tone for the next generation of women in politics. Right now, we've elected the first Gen Z member to Congress. You know, we elected Maxwell Frost to Congress from Florida's 10th congressional district, and he is the first Gen Z member of Congress, but we have yet to elect a member of Gen Z that has the perspective of someone who's grown up as a Gen Z woman in our generation. And so we'll see how that plays out. We had some Gen Z women that have ran for office in the 2024 election cycle, and some of whom ran for Congress, and they lost their elections. But now it's starting to become even more of a problem, because as the years keep going and we still lack the current Gen Z representation, this status quo that young people in general are unhappy with is bound to, of course, continue. But continuing, it states, I'm a Gen Z feminist who came into consciousness online during the first Trump presidency, as many of us did, a coming-of-age experience that feels inseparable from internet friendships with people like Fox, whom I followed since 2018. I've witnessed her meteoric rise from a free lunch kid who went viral in high school for confronting then Republican Senator Jeff Flake over voting to defund Planned Parenthood, to an influencer strategist for Kamala Harris's 2020 campaign, to a seasoned content creator bringing politics and young people together. And you know, so many members, I just want to add, of my generation have been locked out of political influence, whereas in previous generations by this time we already saw the young starting to make a name for themselves in politics, like John F. Kennedy. For instance, a lot of members of the silent generation gave way for the baby boomers to rise in politics, but now fast forward to 2025, a lot of the previous generations have locked Gen Z, millennials, and probably soon to be Gen Alpha out of politics. And this is really disastrous for the policies that we are going to see, like on climate change, whereas the previous generation, they don't have as much of an incentive to be well thought and less short-sighted in their decisions when it comes to stuff like climate change, because, you know, in 15 to 20 years, they're not going to be around to face those consequences of their often short-sighted decisions. But here it continues stating, most headlines identify Fox as a Gen Z influencer, a label I find reductive, which I agree with, if not entirely misleading. Fox is very online, yes, but she's harnessing her digital skills in favor of political goals, particularly reproductive access. Social media savvy is also just plain common sense for Fox's small but growing cohort of Gen Z politicians and candidates, from Representative Maxwell Frost, like I just talked about, who pulls no punches against President Donald Trump on Twitter, to New York City Council member Kai Osei, whose TikToks unpack issues like local transit policies, to Kat Abugazale, running for Congress in Illinois after a career in progressive media. Fox is among a number of young activists who came up during Trump's first term, some of whom have since burned out or left politics entirely. And I think a great example of that was the March for Our Lives movement. I've heard from a lot of people that after the Parkland shooting, a lot of people that were at the forefront of the March for Our Lives movement, there's a reason why you don't see them at the forefront now, because a lot of them have burnt out or have gone cynical or disenchanted with politics. And who can blame them, you know, with how we treat our young people in politics today. And it's crazy because Donald Trump is still at the forefront of the conversation, right? And he is the oldest president ever, again, to be inaugurated. And Donald Trump, he's radicalized so many people, for the better or for the worse. You know, he's been in politics since I was in elementary school, since I was in middle school and high school. And now since I'm in college, he's still in politics. And we have to do something about the fact that there's so many people like Donald Trump who've been elected into office and, you know, Donald Trump, he still pretends he's an outsider. But of course, now he's a career politician, being in politics for 10 years now. There's still a problem with a lot of just people who've been born generations ago stay in politics like Donald Trump for decades on end and won't leave and pass the torch to the next generation. And this isn't, again, a Donald Trump problem. This is just a general problem in politics. But Donald Trump is a great example of the issues that I'm talking about. But continuing, it states, in a special issue cover for Teen Vogue, March for Our Lives founder Delaney Tarr described the betrayal she felt after becoming this new kind of 21st century celebrity. The youth activism industrial complex that Tarr defines in that piece puts the focus on the individual versus the system. The youth versus everyone who should bear responsibility for the crisis we're facing. Now, I want to skip over a little to fast track a little to the interview portion of this article, because I believe that to represent Gen Z, it's really important to have the person who represents Gen Z, of course, be someone who's experienced a lot of what Gen Z, or most of Gen Z, goes through, right? Obviously, Gen Z is not a monolith, but you can still experience what the majority of your generation experiences, which is why I think the interview portion detailing her thoughts and her life experiences is very crucial. So with that said, let's just start. It states, Teen Vogue. Let's start with the nitty-gritty of this race. It's going to be a hard one. You're you're up against a very crowded field of competitors, including the late Representative Grijalva's daughter and some other seasoned politicians in a solidly blue district. What made you decide to enter this race, and how do you plan to stand out? And Fox states, I'm building the plane as I fly, which is how a lot of our generation operates. But we have the cultural moment behind us. I've been conducting interviews with electeds and people on the ground over the last year. Since the loss in 2024, what I have heard, not just from young people, but from people all across the country, is that they want new and younger leadership. And this is exactly what I have been saying for years now. It's not just Democrats saying it, but it's also Republicans too. Again, if you court the next generation, you're going to win the next generation. And as someone who ran for a previous seat in the state legislature in their home state when they were 17, and that I'm referring to my own race from years ago, the person that I was running to fulfill the seat of, they had been in office for 8 years, and they had done nothing in that time. And that was exactly the sentiment I felt that prompted me to run for my seat at the time. And it's exactly in this sentiment that I'm hearing from Fox here, I completely understand. And continuing, it states, this is a seat, the seat that she's running for in Congress in Arizona, that's been held for 20 years. People my age in this district have basically never seen a competitive congressional election, and I think they deserve to have options. Healthy primaries are good for everyone and good for democracy. And, you know, again, I believe the next crop of Gen Z progressive candidates will be our best leaders we've ever had, which is why I'm doing this progressive media channel. It's why I'm continuing to share stories like these, because if we cultivate and nurture the next generation, we'll get the best crop of leaders that we've ever had. I truly believe that. And not just in office will we have this best coalition of people and crop of progressive leaders, but it's also in the media. But we need a multi-generational, multi-racial coalition to make this work. So continuing, it states, more specifically on how I differentiate from these other candidates in the field, I grew up in Section 8 housing and on SNAP benefits and Medicaid. For me, the social services that Donald Trump and Elon Musk have put in their crosshairs aren't theoretical, and they are not talking points. They're the things that made it possible for me to be the first in my family to go to college. I think that lived experience differentiates me from people in the field, but so does my age. We need young people with a real sense of urgency at this moment. Now, every single time I've spoken to young people that are running for office in general, because this topic interests me so much, very heavily, all of them have told me universally that experience has always been something that they've come across as an issue. People say, you don't have enough experience. You don't have enough life experience because you look at you're young. But the best ideas that we've had historically as a nation has come from, for instance, our founding fathers being young, from us electing a young president like Senator John F. Kennedy in 1960. It's all come primarily from just idealism that comes from being young. And of course, you can still be much older and have that youthful idealism. But I want to say that you just can't completely exclude young people from the conversation when historically young people have been pivotal in making our democracy and our country function. So, and plus people say you don't have enough life experience. Okay, but I want to pose to the same politicians that have been in office for decades. Do you have the same life experience as growing up under school shooting drills? Do you have the same life experience as being under the constant worry of climate change, of global warming? Do you have the constant worries that a lot of young people have relating to housing and inflation and just how unaffordable the housing just in general is in this economy, right? So I won't say that and just completely discount, older politicians in office's life experiences, but I will say that your life experience, if you're an older politician in office, looks different than ours. Just because it's different doesn't mean it's any less valuable. Continuing, it states, Teen Vogue asks, running for office takes a lot of people and infrastructure behind you. How are you going to navigate that? And she says, I had already been looking at the seat for 2026 when over the summer, the late Congressman Grijalva shared that he wouldn't be running again because he was sick. Then during Trump's joint address to Congress, I was interviewing electeds on Capitol Hill. So many people watched and felt a sense of frustration that people in both parties didn't stand up to Donald Trump. And I was there myself just thinking, these cannot be the fighters. These cannot be the people standing between Donald Trump and my mom and her neighbors' access to housing and food. That was the day I started having conversations about a seat. Just a few days later, the congressman passed, which threw us into a special election on a completely different timeline. If you're looking to run for office, here's some advice. There's a personal aspect. You have to really feel it. Feel called to it. because you've risked your safety and privacy. It changes not only your life, but the lives of the people you love. For me, the first calls I made were to my big sisters. As you're prepping to run, make sure that your tightest circle is going to be there with you and that your personal life, including your personal finances, are set up to handle this, which preludes to many young people from running. Again, it's why I believe that we need to overturn legislation like Citizens United, because they're a barrier to entry, not just for people in general, but especially young people entering politics. Continuing, it states, the second piece on the logistics is that I've been building relationships in this space before I ever knew I would need them. I've been an organizer in Arizona since 2015. I got my start organizing around sex ed in my school district, and I've worked on campaigns, most notably the Kamala Harris campaign in 2020. When I gave it my hard, personal yes after these conversations with my friends and family, the next step was to head to my network and ask for their support. And then Teen Vote asked her what her strategy would be to reaching out to the people that she grew up around, and how is she going to engage with her voters in a different way than she does with her digital followers. And she responds, I actually think they go hand in hand. In the same way that there was a time when phone banking and text banking were new, our campaign has already launched different strategies. Just the other night, 3 young people and I were sitting around my kitchen table going through the folks who engaged with our launch video, going through comments, reshares, looking to see who was in our district, and sending them each a direct message. And of course, this launch video I shared with you guys. This was, again, borrowing from my organizer background. You gotta make direct asks to people. We've already been launching new and different strategies like DM banking. Young people aren't going to answer their phone from a number they don't know. And that was a strategy I also employed, and I've seen other young people employ when they run for office. And for Gen Z, it's going to look different for how we engage them. You know, there's 2 sides of Gen Z. The Gen Z that grew up outside of COVID, the Gen Z that grew up during COVID. I'm kind of a mix of both. If it weren't for my parents and also the support of the people that I grew up with, I probably could have seen myself growing up with completely different politics. But it's why we got to continue reaching out to these people. And it's why I always, for instance, have an understanding to those that are conservatives, that have an open mind to change. So, you know, also if you voted for Donald Trump the first as opposed to the 3rd or 4th time, I think it's a different story, and minds and opinions can be changed there over time. And continuing the story, it states, on our day of action, we all gathered at a brewery. I think half of our volunteers had never collected signatures or petitions before, so we trained them. Then we hit 4th and Congress, which are party streets in Tucson, and got out and had conversations with voters who hadn't heard about the special election. While a lot of people in a primary like this would go for high efficacy voters because it's likely to be a low turnout election, that's not our strategy. We are looking to engage people who otherwise would have sat out this election. And we also know, like a lot of digital organizing, when the data that is provided to them isn't always accurate. I voted in every single election in my life since I've turned 18. And even when I was 17 in my state, I'm allowed to vote if I'm 17 in primaries, right? So I voted in primaries, I voted in general elections, I voted in special elections my entire life. But just because I was young, I was assigned a low turnout score in the software for that a lot of Democrats use, specifically Minivan, if those of you that are organizers know about that software. But continuing, it states, I'm wondering if you have any takeaways from the 2024 Harris campaign. In many ways, it feels like a temperature check of where our country is, where young men are specifically, and how the internet and tech are increasingly structurally far right places. And Fox says, I think about all those young people we lost in 2024 who didn't turn out to vote. I had to take a hard look at the mirror as someone who has worked behind the scenes for causes and candidates to create content, publicly asking young people to take action, to share their stories, to organize, to vote. I came to the personal feeling that I couldn't ask them to keep doing that if I couldn't give them something to really get excited about after this hard loss. That influenced my decision to get into this race. Every election, people ask me, how do we get young people involved? And the answer is, we need to get them on the ballot, right? We need to get young people on the ballot. And it makes sense. I find it really interesting. You know, even when I ran for office, and this is exactly what propelled me to make this YouTube channel, and I've never shared this publicly. I've shared it with people, this story with people behind the scenes, but I have some friends from when I grew up on the internet that dropped out of high school, that dropped out of college even. And these were the people that typically voted for Donald Trump. And this is who Donald Trump courted. But I remember after my race was over, because they knew that I was running at the time as a progressive candidate, their politics were starting to shift just by watching me run. And when I came in time to ask for their support, even though they didn't live in my district, I asked them to just support the campaign with every like, every retweet. they still did that, right? Despite not living in my district. And over time, they saw how my progressive policies that I was advocating for when I was running for office, they were starting to see how valid and how good that they were to the welfare of society. And that in turn later changed their politics down the line. And it was really interesting because in the 2024 election, blue collared men that dropped out of high school or college that Donald Trump courted, they typically went for Donald Trump. But those people that were my friends that fit into those categories, they voted, that they later told me, voted for Kamala Harris. That's why I think it's really important for young people to be part of the process and for us to encourage that. I had so much encouragement when I was running for office from just people that weren't in my generation, from older generations that encouraged me. So I was really happy to see that. But we know for a fact that the general mood of politics is that it's really toxic to young people entering, whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican, and we need to start changing that. But yeah, with that said, thank you so much for watching this. If you live in Fox's district, I strongly encourage you to vote for her in the Arizona primaries. And if you made it this far, drop a blue heart in the comments below.